and a bunch of other stuff that, that the Speckle OS team is working on. So give it up for Antoine.
Hey everyone, I'm Antoine. I'm the founder of Speckle, also commonly referred to as Speckle OS. It's a bit awkward at the moment. We're kind of going through a small rebranding from Speckle OS to just Speckle. But nonetheless, we're focused on providing a UX layer on top of Polkadot. In particular, this concept of a connected decentralized web, or Web3. So I think it's no secret that great UX is the keystone to user adoption. Unless it's easy for the average user who currently uses the web to be onboarded with a wallet and to interact with blockchains, it's going to be very difficult to get wide adoption of Web3. However, great UX is not enough. It has to be far more convenient than Web 2.0 offerings. The virtues of decentralization are nice and they're good goals to aim for, but unfortunately, I don't think that would be enough to convince the user of today to switch from, say, using services like Facebook or even Google services to decentralized offerings. And I think it's just purely because convenience is king when it comes to user adoption. Unless we can provide services that are more convenient than centralized offerings, then it's going to be very hard to convince users to transition over to decentralized applications and so on. And I think this creates kind of a vicious cycle. When you rely upon the convenience of a particular service provider, then you become kind of locked into their system. So I think it would be good that if we can get users to appreciate the convenience of decentralized offerings and therefore become reliant on decentralized service providers. And I think the great thing about decentralized applications is that we do have the capacity to provide more convenient solutions than centralized offerings, such as removing data segregation and data silos, so we can have interoperable data between applications. We can have universal logins, I think is another great example of how we can provide more convenient user access to applications without having to enter a password or having to create separate logins for each service. So the capacity is there. We just need to make it happen for Web3. So I'm going to now go into the common problems with UX as it stands now. Some of these are quite obvious, and there are many teams working on it at the moment. So I don't wish to derogate from a lot of the work that's already happening now on that. But nonetheless, it's good to kind of just reverberate and take an overview of what still needs to be done in the UX space. The first one really is key pairings and addresses. They're very hard to remember from a user point of view. If I could provide quite an anecdote from my childhood, but me and my friends used to be crazy about our Nintendo Wii back in school, and I remember that our consoles had specific identifiers that were not human readable, not easy to commit to memory, and so we had much frustration trying to remember a series of integers, which is much simpler than an address, than a wallet address. So I mean, we can have really easy solutions on the client side. We can have a browser or wallet that maps an address to a username. But nonetheless, even having to enter this address once, I think, is frustration enough for the user and is an inhibition to a better user experience. I think with the advent of more blockchains, and in particular Substrate, we're going to have more wallets and browsers pop up that are specific to that particular chain. And I think that there's going to be a difficulty in getting the user to want to firstly install one browser extension or one wallet to access one chain, let alone a suite of them for multiple chains. And I think whilst projects like Polkadot and Cosmos are looking to connect protocols, connect blockchains on a protocol level, we may still run into the issue of UI still segregating blockchains from a user point of view. So that's something to be aware of and something to work towards providing a more unified solution. Data segregation, while blockchains still try to remove, this concept of data silos that exist on centralized offerings, there's still segregation between chains because they can't easily communicate with each other. So that's still a problem. And of course, we do have projects working on solving that. Data discovery is an interesting one. I don't think enough is really being said about data discovery on blockchains and how we make that more user-friendly. In particular, users discovering dApps or specific types of data on blockchains. I mean, they could read the block themselves, but I think that would be quite a difficult process for the average user who isn't tech savvy, and even someone who is tech savvy probably wouldn't have the time to want to do that. So there are services that have been popping up that that curate dApps, that allow you to submit your dApp to them. They'll process it, check if it's not malicious, and then publish it on their website for user discovery. I think this isn't a good approach at all. I think that has the tendency to recreate things like the Google Play Store and create reliance upon centralized offerings, centralized UI offerings that mask or undermine their underlying decentralized protocols. So we need to be very mindful about how we approach, how we abstract decentralized protocols on a UI level and ensure that even the UI itself approaches this in a decentralized manner. So data discovery is a big one. And then the next one, and you would have heard this quite a bit already from Edgeware and Ryan, is governance. Governance, I believe, is going to take a much more prominent role in blockchains soon, within this year and the next years. And so the requirement that users get active in governance and this concept of ensuring that there's enough of a voter turnout to prevent a small number of users making decisions on behalf of the rest of the network, that will be an issue. And that will have to be serviced as well on a UI front, ensuring that it's accessible to the average user and intelligible to the average user to participate in these processes. I mean, there are still many problems. I mean, things such as token-specific protocols, having to purchase a specific token to access a specific protocol is a big issue. Gas costs, lost keys, phishing, this absence of resolution mechanisms that you would otherwise have in centralized offerings. The list goes on. I mean, it's quite messy at the moment, but the great thing is we get to control every part of it, and we can make it easier going forward. So although these problems do exist, there's capacity to make it easier. Here steps in the concept of Web3, the connected decentralized web. Projects like Polkadot, projects like Cosmos, I believe will make tackling these challenges and issues much easier down the track. In particular, we're focused on Polkadot. So that's what I'll be framing our approaches in relation to. So we are heading towards a multi-chain future. I'm 100% convinced there will be no one chain to rule them all. And with frameworks like Substrate, this will become much more apparent. If I can actually quote Emil in respect to this first point, he wrote in an article that he published in the Polkadot blog that we will see a Cambrian explosion of innovation following Substrate. Hope I quoted you correctly on that one. Cool, I did. So we're going to see more and more chains pop up in the future, and ecosystem providers have to be ready to service them in a way that's decentralized and at the same time unified. I think the worst outcome we can have with many chains popping up is that they all have to resort to their own UI specification and therefore separate their interoperability on a UI front. I think we can do better, and I think that's what motivates us, to be ready to service all these chains and allow the user to interact with them in a more unified manner. Polkadot, I think, solves also the data segregation problem. So instead of having data siloed away on particular blockchains, now we can allow them to communicate. This will solve the creation of redundant data. So if I want to use my identity on Ethereum, or I want to use my identity on EOS, and I'll have to recreate my identity on both blockchains. That's redundant. That's a bad user experience. And so projects like Polkadot will allow, say, a protocol focused on identity to service identity and allow a dApp to then connect to that identity and use it in a meaningful way. So that will be a big benefit to the user experience in the long run. And again, Polkadot lays the foundation for a cohesive, connected Web3 experience, which is essential for good UI. So I mentioned a bit about this already in the previous slide, but it does provide much better opportunities for better UX. Interoperable data, I discussed that, the removal of redundant data. We're going to see chains designed specifically for particular functionality. So there's this phrase called dApp chains that's been thrown around quite a bit in various Polkadot medium and articles. Media and articles, and so we're going to have chains that are specifically curated and specifically designed to service, a particular application functionality, rather than general purpose chains. The interchain communication again will produce more cohesive dApp experiences. We'll have dApps, one dApp protocol relying on another dApp protocol, relying on another dApp protocol, and on the UI front, this will all be abstracted away from the user. They won't know that there were 5 different protocols communicating with each other to produce one outcome for them. And that's what we're focused on the UI front, allowing the user to leverage this multitude of protocols all connected together without realizing that they were doing so in the first place. And then this is just like another concept. I mean, you can leverage DEXs to access liquidity. So we talked about this issue of token-specific protocols. I'll need token X to access protocol X. Well, with intercommunication between protocols and chains, we can now have things like user interface on the back end, swapping their token for the requisite token-specific protocol that they wish to use without them knowing it in the first place. I mean, and there are a slew of other opportunities that will become more apparent as we start using interchain communications. That said, with the advent of more chains, we could potentially run into even more UI, UX problems if we don't approach it in a sophisticated manner. I mentioned earlier this idea of, although on a protocol level, Polkadot and Cosmos will connect chains, we may still run into the issue where user interfaces don't make full use of that underlying communication. And we may see this with chains, using their own user interface and therefore segregating the potential for, protocol collaboration that will therefore be accessible by the user. So we have to be very careful to ensure that that user interface is a general purpose enough to allow the user to take advantage of all that connectivity happening on the protocol level. We may have the issue with more chains, relying upon their own native token to fund particular ventures or avenues on that particular chain. And again, that might create even more issues with cryptocurrency and native token management than already exists. But again, I mean, there are potential solutions to that nonetheless on a protocol level. We may also see that as governance takes a greater and greater role in the interaction with blockchains, that we may have too many governance processes with on too many chains happening at once, and therefore the user getting too distracted on one, or not being able to wade through the noise of knowing what governance procedure to participate in, when to do it, and and ensuring that they're notified of it in the first place. We've spoken about voter turnout being a huge issue with governance protocols, and so we have to make sure on the UI front that the user is able to streamline their governance participation. Rather, this can be through curating which chains that they wish to focus on, ensuring that they're notified that a particular referendum has been proposed in relation to that chain, and then being able to understand what that referendum is about and how they can participate in that. So we may have this cascading effect where, with these multitude of chains, that they all end up having low voter turnout due to distractions and noise in the space. The difficulty, it's going to become more difficult to find data with more chains, more connectivity. The scope becomes much larger, and therefore it may even become even harder to find useful data on blockchains, at least from from the average user's point of view. So we'll need to service that, be ready to service that growth of data. And then, because there are so many protocols connecting at the base layer, it would maybe even become even harder to abstract this on the UI front. So more problems may arise from this, and so we have to be ready to tackle that in a meaningful way. This is where our focus really steps in. We're focused more on the UX, UI side of a connected, decentralized web. I've mentioned before that we position ourselves as the UX layer on top of Polkadot. And we're primarily focused on these four things. 5 things, sorry, there's a double up on that. So 5 things. So we will eventually release our own parachain, which will allow the user to, which will abstract a lot of the onboarding process for the user, such as allowing them to create human-readable names that attach or map to their wallet address. And through that account, they can then interact with and communicate with all the different protocols on Polkadot. So instead of having to worry about ensuring that they have the correct account for this particular protocol, the correct account for this particular chain, they can do it all on one parachain, which is the parachain we'll eventually deploy later, and then they can communicate with the broader network through that. So that ties into point number 2. Point number 3 is that through this account they can then participate in multiple governance processes on different chains. So rather than again having to have that one specific account for say Edgeware and having to participate in that governance process, and then another account for participating in the governance of the relay chain, they can do it all through one account. So that'll provide a much more unified, cohesive experience for the user. We're also looking at decentralizing data discovery, and in particular DApp and chain discovery, and I'll get more into that in a moment. And then, yeah, just general protocol abstractions where we can, in addition to all these things. So this is the stack. I mean, I won't go too much into this. So as I mentioned, at the bottom, we will release our own parachain. And then if you ride it all the way to the top, the browser intends to abstract all those processes at the bottom and basically hide it all from the user. So they won't know that, there's a complex web of, interactivity happening behind the scenes. I don't want to get too much into that just yet. I mean, we did talk about this quite a bit at the Web3 Summit talk about how the user will create their identity through Speckle. But I want to get into data discovery in particular, so perhaps I'll skip this for now. So I want to talk a bit about this. So on the right is a teaser, really, of what our browser will look like when the user tries to find dApp chains or particular blockchains. It looks very reminiscent of the Google Play Store, but the key difference here is that all that data is being read from a parachain. So that parachain will have, or our parachain will have, a token-curated registry, which will index dApps and blockchains that will then be curated and managed by the users of that chain. And so rather than having a process where a user will have to submit their chain or submit their dApp and then having it checked over by an internal team, this can all be decentralized. We can have decentralized data discovery, and we can make that meaningful to the user without them having to rely on Google choosing which apps to approve on the Play Store and having a political process around that. So I think that's something I'm really excited about, enabling a Google Play Store type experience with a decentralized backend to fuel all that interactivity. The next thing that I'm really excited about is how we can make governance simpler, how we can make governance processes more accessible to the user and much more intelligible to the user. So on the right is what, again, is another teaser from our browser, where the user will be able to select the chains they wish to focus on and then access it from a dashboard. So on the right, you have that the user's already picked roughly 7 chains that they wish to focus on and interact with. And let's assume Edgeware was there, so let's say it's 8 chains. The user can then be notified when a particular proposal has been made on a particular chain, such as, say, Edgeware. They can then follow that notification, and it'll take them to a governance screen relating to that particular chain. There, they'll be able to view an overview of what that proposal is about. They can vote yes or no on it, commit tokens to that vote, and they can basically interact with it on a UI front. The one thing we're really interested in is providing a much more complex suite of governance interactivity. So Dylan mentioned earlier about anonymous voting and secret voting, and that's something we're going to discuss with him in particular about how we can facilitate that from a UI perspective. So if we can imagine that there are multiple chains all connected to this browser will dynamically adjust the governance UI to suit that particular chain. And so that chain can basically checkbox which governance tools they wish to use for that chain, and the browser will dynamically update that. So governance UX and governance UI is something that we're really interested in, really keen on working towards. And I think it'll get more robust as we integrate more and more chains down the track. This is kind of a very general overview of how the parachain and browser will kind of interact. So the Speckle parachain will sit amongst the Polkadot network, and it will be able to communicate with all the different parachains that are sitting on that network. As you can see, there are modules for identity, modules for token-created registries, modules for account management, data management. And then the browser will abstract all these processes from the user and allow streamlined user onboarding, streamlined governance interactions, and dApp interactions. So that's basically it. I mean, if being involved in a multi-chain browser is something that interests you, or you're looking to get involved or release your own chain, then it'd be great if you came and spoke with us. We're very keen, in particular, on projects that are interested in governance and how we can service that on a UX UI front, and hopefully grow the suite of services we can provide to chains that we'll build on Substrate in the future. Thank you. Oh, questions? Yes, go for it.
So does your wallet have a capability of, like, dApp browser, like for example, Trust Wallet or Status has a browser embedded. Is that what you're going to do as well?
So that's a great question. So this is a browser extension at first. It operates very similar to MetaMask.
Okay.
But eventually down the track, we do want to release a mobile app that will have that functionality built into it, much like Status and Toshi. I'm not sure if you've used Toshi before. So they do have a built-in dApp browser. And our idea is that whether the user's on their phone or on their desktop, that their accounts will be automatically synced between them. So down the track, yes, for the mobile app.
Can I ask one more question?
Sure.
Yeah. So I went to Denver and I experienced a Barna wallet and, like XDAI and all that stuff.
Sorry, I missed that.
So I went to the Denver,
Yep.
Ethereum Denver Hackathon,
Yep.
and where they had a Barna wallet, which does a cross-chain between the mainnet and the XDAI POA network.
Yep.
And their approach was the whole application embedded wallet inside rather than relying on third party, like for example, Aragon, if they want to have a parachain, whatever stuff. I wonder what pros and cons of approach of embedding wallet inside the dApp as compared to relying on to some third party like your solution.
That's a really good question. I think from our point of view, we want to make this as general purpose as possible. So I don't think there's going to be one UI to rule them all. I think there'll be particular offerings that service particular needs. And so perhaps having it embedded in a dApp will be able to service that particular dApp in particular, specifically. But I think there is still room for general UI where the user kind of, wants to just generally interact with the network, maybe just participating, manage their governance participation across the network, manage their assets across the network, then I think there's still room for, these general purpose multi-chain browsers. But that's not to say that, having, UI specifically embedded to a particular dApp will not be used. I think that also has its use cases as well. Yep. Anyone else? Nope. Thank you, guys. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Antoine. So next, we're having Redo.